The average Indian income is $1,500, 75% below the national average. His unemployment rate is 10 times the national average. He lives 10 years less than the average American. The death rate for his children is twice as high as the national average. Tuberculosis rates are 7 times higher than the average Americans. These facts are the cold statistics which illuminate a national tragedy and a national disgrace. They demonstrate that the first American has in fact become the last American, with the opportunity for employment, for education, for a decent income, and for a chance for a full and a rewarding life. A course of learning as obvious as it has been ignored. We are going to listen to the Indian people speak for themselves about the problems that they confront and about the changes that must be made in seeking effective education for all of their children. The American Indian, despite folklore, is not the vanishing American. There are now almost 600,000 Indians in the United States. While that figure only represents 0.5% of our population, it is also the fastest growing of any ethnic group. Indians can be found in every state of our nation. My own state of New York is the 8th largest Indian population in the country. Moreover, the Indian, despite the pressures of the majority, has retained his cultural identity. Nearly 300 separate Indian languages and dialects are still spoken in this country, and at least 45 of the Indian children, more than any other group, believe themselves to be below average in intelligence. Indian children in the 12th grade have the poorest self-concept of all of the minority groups tested. These children often abandon their own pride and their own purpose, leave school to confront a society in which they have been offered neither a place nor a hope. And the consequence of this inadequate education is, in fact, a life of despair and of hopelessness. These languages are spoken by more than 1,000 Indians. Various estimates, there are in fact no accurate statistics, suggest that more than half of the Indian school age population, retains the use of their native tongue. The education of these children is primarily in the hands of the federal government. Of the 150,000 Indian children in schools, public, private, mission, and federal, 1/3 are in federally owned and operated institutions. The nature of these schools is diverse, ranging from temporary trailers and Navajo reservations to large off-reservation boarding schools, housing more than 1,000 children each. But our responsibility and our concern cannot stop here. The federal government has partial financial responsibility for 2/3 of the Indian children enrolled in public schools. Under the Johnson-O'Malley Act of 1934, the Secretary of the Interior was authorized to contract with states for Indian education and to permit state use of federal facilities for this purpose. Last year, more than 56,000 Indian children were covered by this act. We have, moreover, committed ourselves to helping Indian education under the Elementary and Secondary Education Act and have included Indian children in the impacted aid formulas under Public Law 874 and 815. The question that has brought us here today is what happens to these children once they enter school? How long do they remain in school? Do they in fact receive an adequate or even a satisfactory education? What happens to them after they leave? The few statistics that we have are the most eloquent evidence of our own failure. The dropout rates are twice the national average. The level of formal education is half the national average. Achievement levels are far below their white counterparts. The Indian child falls progressively further behind the longer that he stays in school. These children are taught, it now appears, by many who are indifferent about the fate of these children. And this indifference finds its way into the hearts of the children themselves. As the Coleman Report on Equal Education Opportunity revealed in 1966, only 1% of Indian children in elementary schools have Indian teachers as principals. 1/4 of elementary and secondary school teachers, by their own admission, would prefer not to teach Indian children to this dilemma. But clearly, effective education lies at the heart of any lasting solution, and it must be an education that no longer presumes that cultural difference means cultural inferiority. It was almost 200 years ago that the leaders of Virginia, having signed a treaty with 6 Indian nations, offered to educate 6 of their sons. The chiefs, although responding with thanks, rejected the offer, citing a previous experiment with white man's education. Their children had come back from the white man's school, said the chiefs, bad runners, ignorant of every means of living in the woods, unable to bear the cold or hunger. They knew neither how to build a cabin, take a deer, or kill an enemy, spoke our language imperfectly, were therefore neither fit for hunters, warriors, or counselors. They were totally good for nothing. Perhaps, the Indians said, the governors would send a dozen white children to learn at the hands of the Indians. We will take great care of their education, promised the chiefs, instruct them in all we know, and make men of them. We can no longer, it seems to me, ignore the lesson of this exchange. If we are to teach, we must also learn. The purpose of these hearings is to begin that learning. I now turn the hearing over to my colleague, Senator Fannin. Before I do, I want to welcome also Senator Yarborough, who has been tremendously interested in the work of that is going to be undertaken by this committee.
To be thought of as irrelevant is the worst of public insults. Who can be surprised if the American Indian is reticent to freely express his attitudes and give to us the great benefit of his wisdom? If my statement sounds foreboding, it is because I have no illusions about the depth of the Indian crisis. nor do I delude myself that the solution will be simple. I represent a state which comprises almost 20% of the total American Indian population and almost one-half of the Indian lands in this country. And while their best interests have been my concern throughout my life, I do not presume to have the answers yet to their problems of education. And I know I can speak for every other member of this subcommittee when I say that we begin this search with no preconceived notions of what those answers will be. The education of the American Indian is a personal commitment of mine. I am grateful that my distinguished colleagues on this subcommittee feel likewise. So we begin. As we do, we ask our Indian citizens to give us their trust that in so educating us, we may in turn educate the public and the Congress, and in turn lift the spirit of education for our Indian countrymen. Mr. Chairman, I ask that my July 10th letter and memorandum to Senator Morris be made a part of the record of these hearings immediately following my testimony.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to appear this morning before this special subcommittee on the most tragically neglected group of Americans in the nation. As a matter of fact, there are conditions of poverty and neglect among Indian Americans that compare in their seriousness with anything that one will find in the underdeveloped parts of the globe, Asia and Africa and Latin America. I'm particularly impressed with the proposition that if we're going to maintain federal schools for Indian children, they ought to be exemplary services of deeply committed and concerned senators. I'm thinking particularly of the chairman of the committee, Senator Kennedy of New York, who was interested in the problems of Indians long before he became a member of the Senate. I well remember during the time he served as Attorney General of the United States, the name of Father John Bride from the Holy Rosary Mission School in Pine Ridge, South Dakota. I think you're going to find that he's one of the best informed and most deeply concerned witnesses that you will hear from in the course of these deliberations. I see the name of Mr. Ben Black Elk from South Dakota on the list. And here again, you will find a man who speaks from conviction and from long experience firsthand with the problems of his people.
Black Elk, Pine Ridge.
See, he doesn't conform, he's not like the rest of us, and they say, why can't he be like the rest of us? They lump the Negro and the Indian problem together, which is a mistake, because the Negro is out to attain middle-class status. The Indian is out to retain. He's out to retain his Indianness. And so it's only in the last 20 years or so people are starting to look into this Indian world to see what's in that Indian world that is worth retaining, that is making the Indian so Indian, and why he wants to remain Indian. And it also surprises them when they find this out. And I quote this from the American Heritage Series, lest you think I'm spinning it off the top of my head. The longest lived race on the face of the earth is the Indian race, appearing long before the Negroid races appeared. The Caucasians, as clearly defined races, appeared. Now, on this premise that a race is only as long-lived as its values, then they must have something tremendous in their value system to make them live so long. Because if the values of a race or a culture go out or become corrupt, then that race and that culture will go down eventually. I cite the great Roman Empire, which flourished brilliantly for 1,000 years, and as long as the old the system of rewards and punishments in one culture doesn't motivate people in another culture. We have been using the system of rewards and punishment, or value system, in the Indian educational system, which reflect our non-Indian American culture, to motivate the Indian, and it doesn't. We should use the Indian value system as motivation for his adjustment to the modern world. We haven't for several reasons. We haven't looked into the Indian value system to see what's in it as worthwhile and as something that can be taught. It can. Secondly, biological needs and our basic human needs for our other needs.
Get the microphone over to him too. No, the one that you've got in front of you. Perhaps you could get closer together.
Chairman and Honorable Subcommittee and fellow Americans and also are my real Americans. I'd like to make a statement here concerning Indian education. To start out with, we eliminate custom by warfare. We wipe them out. But in turn, in the way back years coming, in turn the white man has eliminated us by organized methods. In order to strike back, we have to compete the white man in education. You talk about education. What is Indian education? Does it come to reality where it has a success on its education? Or does it mean that you have to be primarily a white man? That's the question right in there. When we talk about Indian education, us Indians on this face of the earth, we were a primitive people at one time. We knew there's God. And we learned how to worship Him. And we learned for knowledge. We suffered knowledge. We suffered to gain knowledge on top of the hills with a pipe, maybe in the ground. You have to. Just like in the old ancient Bible. But today, as I see it from my viewpoint of view, I'm not a member of the tribal council or neither a BIA. But I feel this way, that Indian education has to come to a certain extent where it has to be changed, the modifications of learning, whereby I'm an Indian. You take a little Indian boy, he's 5 years old. I see one right here. He's taught the ways and means of the Indian knowledge that is Indian. The value of knowledge is in with the old man. The old man's place is to advise to the younger generation. But today, it's not. We have to go back to there in order to get that valuation of that Indian. In other words, I've heard an Indian say this. I am so-and-so, and this the land of my people. I've come a long ways through the centuries. The histories has been written on the four winds, only be captured by wise men to be handed down to generation around campfires. What I think about is the Indian way of life is a very good thing, because when we raise our little children at 5 years old, he's learned the Indian valuation of knowledge from his parents. But when he goes to school, the white man's valuation, it doesn't concur at all. It doesn't. So we have to get along with the things that we have with us in order to go into this education. But speaking about Indian education, when we say that, do we go out to the full extent? That's the main thing I'm here. Do we have to go out to full extent to educate our children to be among the living standards of the white man?
Could I interrupt there just for a moment? What is it that our child is learning to the age of 6, which makes
age of 6?
Just for a moment.
Just
till I finish. What is the child learning to the age of 6, which makes the educational system that we've established unsatisfactory for him?
It's because he's getting education from the value of knowledge of the old parents that has knocked him into it when he was 2 years old. 300 years ago, in Indian, the boy belongs to the man. He takes this little fella to the water in the summertime, and he's 6 months old. Hold him on the water, and that little fellow will swim when he's 2 years old. Right from the start, that is being learned. And then he's got to learn to be a hunter and a warrior, so his father makes him bow and arrow. He goes out and kills a game, even if it's a mouse, anything, but it's a game. And then the parents make a big feast and say, come on, folks, let's eat and be merry because my son might be a great warrior and a hunter. That little one, he gets one feather. There's a story about this war bonnet. The 32 feathers that we have to earn it, just like we do now in schools. The things, the points that we earn to graduate high school on to college. That is the thing I'm trying to get in here, so it could be used in schools. That is the value of the old man's knowledge. He's wise. I have here with me, I don't want to be delayed.
Your children now, how would you, do you think they're good schools or
Well,
unsatisfactory schools?
yes, we have good
Any kind
schools,
of-
all
yeah,
right.
Very good.
But they're getting away from our culture, are so fast that it isn't funny. And we'd like to establish that old wise man's knowledge in them so they can carry out, so when you suddenly you find out you're Indian, and that's it, see.
Personal aggrandizement and things like that. Competition. And there's where his conflict starts. Unconscious there, and gets more conscious as he gets older. So when he gets to be an adolescent, he looks around, he sees all the norms expected of him by the achieving society. He sees he's poor, he doesn't have it, he feels rejected, that he's not wanted. Why go forward? Why stay in school? Because this is the means to that end which is impossible or undesirable for me. Now that's just two quick answers on two values that are conflicting, and I could spend 2 weeks developing the other values and showing specific conflicts in them.
Why does that happen? Reading your statement, what I know of the situation, why is this particularly acute at the time the Indian child reaches the 7th or 8th grade? Why? Evidently, one of the phenomena of all of this is that the Indian child does very well up through the 6th grade, and does as well as any other child, and in some cases far, far better. And then suddenly they get to the 7th or 8th grade, and the tests show that they fall drastically behind.
Yes.
And that continues through the 9th, 10th.
Not only well behind, but then the causes show that they feel terribly rejected, alienated, socially, emotionally, and self-alienated at that age also. Any one of those variables could throw you into an emotional tailspin, but they've got 5 or 6 going.
You have some rather interesting statistics and details about that in your statement. Could you discuss it a little bit about what
happens at that age of adolescence?
why this crossover occurs?
About why, you say?
Yes.
Yes, Senator.
First, it does take place, and no question it does take place amongst Indian children.
Oh, undoubtedly. There's the data for it. It's hard to boil it down in just a couple of minutes.
No,
you see, the Indian youngster starts out, his first contact with a non-Indian world, which is nice and warm and comfortable at home. His first awareness of the non-Indian world outside of him is when the parent relates to the child the fears that the parent has gotten from his ancestors, and the boogeyman term the Indian youngster first hears is washichu aneginikte, which means a white man's going to get you and take you home. Now, this frightens a child. Our mothers all used boogeyman terms on us, but we found out they were fantasies later on. But the Indian youngster goes up and looks out the window, and there's the boogeyman going down his pickup right down to the store. This is something to fear. So his first contact with the non-Indian world is something that's hostile and something to be feared. Now, this goes underground as he gets to, not underground, as he gets to know you and you as individual white persons. He modifies his cognitive map. You are just exceptions, but that general area still remains hostile and something threatening to him. Now, he comes to school, and he meets Miss Smith, Mrs. Jones, and Sister so-and-so. He modifies his cognitive map, but the general area remains hostile. He performs from the sheer love of learning, I think, from the 3rd grade to the 6th grade. And then suddenly that age of adolescence, that age of identification, he starts looking around for orientation as an adult. 2 things happen. He sees the norms of the dominant society, which are material achievement. He sees that he is poorer. He drives a poor car, lives in a poor house. He has not achieved. He does not live up to the expectations of the dominant society. Therefore, he is a failure in their eyes. Therefore, he is being rejected by them. This is his perception of it. See, whether they perceive him that way or not, this is his perception of it. Consequently, he starts looking around to see the causes of this, and he sees his own Indian group. Papa's the reason I'm in this mess, and Grandpa and people like that. So they start disliking their own Indian people as the cause for the mess they're in. They can't go forward, they can't go backwards, they're lost. They're just spinning. They're completely anomic at that age, alienated, terrible. Now, my contention is one of the reasons...
To that extent, we can go all the way. What I want to do is go all the way to meet the Indian in education. the requirements that we're asking for, and I believe it'll be good. And with the Indian culture going along with it, with the wise knowledge that we've been talking about, and I think this will solve our Indian education. Then we'll find out what is really Indian education.
Thank you very much. Father, before we go on to the next witness,
Yes, I speak the Sioux language. In fact, I have a radio
you
program.
rehearsed that, the two of you, before?
Oh, no. I have a radio program that's aired over 11 different stations over a 5-state area on the High Plains. It's an interdenominational talk that I give once a week in the Sioux language.
The primary considerations is the fact that as an Indian youngster gets older, he expects and he receives more and more responsibility in the home. Indians aren't very demonstrative when it comes to showing love, outward signs of love for their elder kids, although they actually do for the infants. But I don't think there's an Indian in this room who can say that he put his arm around his kid after he got about the age of, probably 8 or 9 years. It just isn't done. It's something that they regard as being, you might say, I hate to use the word incestual, but something along that line. So that the only reward that the kid gets is increased responsibility in the home. School teachers, I don't think, realize this. And they attempt to create a situation whereby the student is entirely dependent upon the classroom for his everyday learning. Receive at least half of their education in the home in the early years, just as the rest of us do, just as the rest of the non-Indian population does. How many of you here that aren't Indians can remember stories that were handed down to you by your ancestors, your grandfather and your father? Stories of the old country, maybe. He can't learn, and therefore he should make no effort. So he gives up. He retreats into the only world he knows, which is an Indian reservation, where again, as you say, the conditions are probably worse than any place in the country. I know cases where in 3 wars, and at the beginning, as I said, they actually helped to found a nation and to help it to survive. And it seems to me that the problem of Indian education, although it be complex, is certainly one which the nation can no longer neglect. Because here are a group that are crying for education and crying for understanding. They want to be in a position where they can take jobs in economic industries located on their reservations when that time comes. They want Indians are very, very glad that you have agreed to accept the chairmanship of this committee, because we know of your deep and sincere interest in Indians over the years. We also know this to be true with the other members of the committee. Well, the Bureau of Indian Affairs operates in 2 different areas, really, of education.